Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's AJ Writes Crypto, and I could not be more excited for today's interview because I am here with no other than Benjamin Cowen from Into the Cryptoverse. He said right before the interview, he doesn't feel like it sometimes, but I believe he's on the Mount Rushmore of crypto. I've been a big fan for many years. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I also want to say at Bitcoin Nashville, thank you for the birthday cake at your party. I know it wasn't intended for me, but Jada kind of hijacked the cake, but I do appreciate that, and I wanted to thank you publicly.
Oh, absolutely. I thought that was a fun coincidence, so we could do that.
Yeah, for sure. For you, like, kind of pulled me, and you were like, "It's not going to get any better than this." And I was like, "I know." Good time,
here, right?
right. All downhill from here. That's for sure. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully it's all uphill from here, and hopefully that's what we're going to talk about. So, I know that there are a lot of questions my audience wants me to ask you, but before we get into all of that, I do just want to say, some people might sleep on the fact that you have a PhD in engineering, and you have an extremely above adequate mathematical brain that kind of perfectly converted into crypto. And I kind of wanted you to shed some light on that transition from, your college years into what you've become in crypto.
Sure. Yeah. So I started off in doing my undergrad I started off in aerospace engineering, and I did an internship at NASA Johnson Space Center. And I coded up a lunar rover module of a distributed space simulation. I ended up changing my majors to math and physics. I wasn't super fond of the bureaucracy I encountered there, but I ended up changing my major to math and physics. And it was during some of the math classes that I took. I took a cryptography class where we got to decode certain things and whatnot. And that's more or less where I first got introduced to the crypto industry. Now, back then, it was just basically Bitcoin, because this was I believe it was back in 2011, because it was when I was a junior in college. But then I ended up graduating with the undergrad in math, and I was 2 classes away from a physics major, but I had already I got into grad school, and so I just got the physics minor, and I went to get my master's in nuclear engineering and then PhD in nuclear engineering. And then I studied molecular dynamics simulations of radiation damage in ceramics. And then I know this is getting pretty far out there, but in case people want to know, and then
I think it's awesome.
And then I did some real life experiments using in situ transmission electron microscopy, where we looked at radiation damage at a nanosecond time scale, and the molecular dynamics simulations were at picosecond timescales. And then I did my postdoc at National Lab, and I studied high energy density physics. So basically, I was working with equation of state models to predict how materials behave under extreme conditions. And the reason why that's interesting or useful is because it costs a lot of money to run an experiment. If you're running an experiment with extreme high energy, it costs millions of dollars, right? I mean, think about the Satoshi valuation of those experiments. And so by running simulations, you could actually try to figure out, what experiments did you actually want to run, right? You could do simulations to figure out the best simulations to run, and then actually spend the money to run the few that your simulations told you were the worthwhile ones to run. So I did that. Then I became a staff scientist at the labs. I started my YouTube channel in 2019 while I was a postdoc. And I guess, in 2020, I decided to work on it hard, a little bit more. And then in 2021, I quit my job. And it was hard because I'd spent the last 10 years of my life basically studying to get that job at the lab. But also the crypto scene was booming, and I felt like I couldn't do a good job at both roles, right? I couldn't do a good job in crypto and give it my all, and also do a good job over here. So I had to pick one. And yeah. I mean, I ultimately chose this. Obviously, I don't regret it. The crypto industry has gone on to do, really amazing things even since then. And yeah, I mean, here we are today. And yeah, that was essentially, the transition from academia into the cryptoverse.
Wow, that is one hell of a story. And I must say, I find it interesting, the dichotomy between, most people that go full-time crypto, quitting their jobs like construction or restaurants or the normal quit your job, and your quit your job is like that is a flexecution on the quit your job story, dude. But that's really awesome though.
So sometimes when I'm arguing with degens on Twitter, I really wonder where I took a wrong turn.
Yeah, exactly. And I do find that extremely interesting. And I took calculus in college. I didn't go that far, right? But like there is a point where, I've had some pretty interesting conversations on this channel with very, very brilliant mathematicians, John Allen Woods, CTO of Algorand, Lehman Baird from Hedera Foundation. And I do really find it interesting on the certain angles or certain things that established mathematicians, the way they interpret crypto or certain things they focus on that your average person wouldn't think to look at. And, kind of with that in mind, is that some of why dominance is a big focus on the channel? Or
probably, yeah.
Okay.
I think where it really came from was, there was multiple cycles where I think the way it works is like when people first start off, they get introduced to Bitcoin, and then as they go on, they get into altcoins, and then they get into even riskier altcoins, and then at some point we get a bear market, and then people are like, oh, maybe I should have just stuck with Bitcoin, and then over a longer period of time, people sort of, I'm not saying that everyone becomes a maxi, but I think at some point they become they become more risk averse, right? Where it's not that they're not willing to take on risk in the altcoin market. It's just that they're not going to take on as much risk as they once did, right? Rather than YOLOing their entire net worth into an altcoin, they might have their crypto portfolio be like a larger percentage Bitcoin, and then they take a smaller percentage, put in the altcoin market, and if it works out, it works out. So I think so what happened was, there was a couple of cycles where I was looking at these alts, and some of the alts did outperform Bitcoin, like in prior cycles, right? I mean, like in 2019, I bought Chainlink, and it drastically outperformed Bitcoin back then. I'm sure you probably remember that outperformance as well. And there were other coins that didn't, right? I mean, a lot of other coins just bled back to Bitcoin until the Fed pivoted to quantitative easing. And so essentially what happened last cycle was I looked at, sort of what happened over the entire span of it. And Bitcoin dominance didn't top last cycle until really it was January of the post halving year, right? It was January 2021, like sort of late December 2020 and early January 2021. And I remember thinking back then, I'm like, rather than ride all the altcoins down on their Bitcoin pairs and just try to pick out the few that are outperforming, why not just stick with Bitcoin until the dominance uptrend is over? Because the reality is you outperform a majority of the market. Now, of course, this cycle, we have seen some altcoins outperform. Most of the altcoins that have actually outperformed Bitcoin are meme coins, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a knock against the people that have traded those. At the end of the day, I mean, the goal, I think, is to make money, right? I mean, if it's on this ticker or that ticker, it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's why I said don't ever marry an altcoin, because they'll take half in the divorce, right? They'll take more than half in the divorce. But yeah, I mean, I think that the best strategy for most people is to just stick with Bitcoin, at least until the basically the post halving year. And that doesn't mean you can't take on any risk. It just means like if you keep your portfolio 80 to 90% Bitcoin, you're going to outperform a majority of the market. Yes, we can always go cherry pick some of the alts that did better, but that's kind of where I was coming from. And I was trying to figure out, how do I communicate a single strategy that will work for most people, right? That's why I decided to focus on Bitcoin dominance.
Right. And for sure, it is brilliant. And, hindsight's 2020. I was in crypto before the 2021 bull run, but the 2021 bull run was the first time I went through a bull cycle with both feet in, like studying, learning. I like block out my days by the hour to this day studying crypto. And like I said, like hindsight's 2020. And I kind of feel like a lot of people kind of hum and haw about, the altcoins, especially in bear markets, because it kind of feels like, oh, well, Bitcoin's market cap is, let's just say at the time in the bear market, $1 trillion. And this altcoin's market cap is 1.2 billion. So like people think to themselves, so for Bitcoin to double, it needs another $1 trillion, where this altcoin only needs 1.2 billion. Which one's more likely to happen first? And I do completely understand that school of thinking. And there is a time to go heavy into alts. But really, I believe the most previous bear market coming into today, my lesson has been learned on bear market strategies. And that has everything to do with a lot of Bitcoin and not really focusing on alts until the time comes. And I think that, and that's certainly a lesson that I've learned from you. So thank you. So I do want to talk, I do want to get to the alts. I'll save that for a minute. First of all, everybody watching this, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Ben, thank you for taking your time to be on the show. Make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, all the things. All Ben's social media is down below in the description. But I do want to kind of pivot to talking Bitcoin dominance moving forward. I remember I was at your party in not Nashville, the year before in Miami. And we were talking about how you predicted, I think you made your prediction before that party, but you were saying how Bitcoin dominance was going to go to 60%. And I remember thinking to myself, what? No way. And I refuse to see it. Like I refuse to take it on. And I'm definitely kicking myself in the butt for that. But at the same time, I have to give you your accolades for making that call way before it seemed crazy. But what job well done. But now I'm kind of at the point with Bitcoin dominance where, like we said before the show, I mean, it's still structurally in an uptrend. It's in an ascending, broadening channel. There's big support resistance around 57% from the low back in, I believe, 2020 or 2021. And if it was to fall over 57%, that would also be a break of structure of the ascending, broadening uptrend. And if we look back to 2021, you can kind of see a clear distinction from January 2021 to May, where Bitcoin dominance just completely fell straight down the hill. And that was a bulk of the 2021 alt season. So I believe I've kind of summed this down to, once Bitcoin dominance breaks structure, loses support resistance at 57, that would be probably the most optimal time to load up into altcoins. And I'm not really even posing a question here. I just kind of wanted to run. That's kind of my thesis at the moment. I just wanted to what your thoughts are on that, or if you have any charts you'd like to share.
Yeah, you can throw up my screen. I think that's the thing. I mean, so I first talked about dominance going to 60% when I think it was in May of 2021. I mean, when dominance was like 40. I didn't know it was going to take until the end of 2024 to get here, but here we are, right? I mean, this is how long it took, and the degens were a lot stronger than I thought they would be. They, while a lot of alts have bled, they didn't bleed as quickly as I thought they would. Can you see my screen?
Oh, 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's Bitcoin dominance. And I think what you said is probably, the right strategy. Just because the target of 60% has been hit, it doesn't mean that it can't go higher. I will tell you the reasons I came up with 60%. I mean, I said 60% because a lot of times when you think about sort of like a bubble, right? When you get a bubble in the market, the expectation is that when the bubble pops, that you kind of return back to where the bubble began. And if you look at really where Bitcoin dominance broke down, it was right here in April of 2021. That was when sort of that major break occurred, where it dropped from 60% to 49% in a single month, right? I mean, that's a huge drop in a single month. And so I just thought, if this is a bubble of alts against Bitcoin, then we likely eventually return back to where we broke down from, right? And so that was where I came up with 60%. I also, I don't think it's going to go as high as 73%, which is where we were at last cycle, because the market, there's stable coins today, right? I mean, the stablecoin market takes up not like a significant amount, right? It's not insignificant anymore. Back in 2019, it was hardly anything. Today, it's multiple percent. So it's probably not going to go as high as 73 either. The other interesting thing that you can do, this was not how I came up with 60. It was something I found later, and I was like, oh, I like that confirmation, that confirmation bias. Let me also show that. If you look last cycle, you can see that Bitcoin dominance retraced to the 0.618 fib, in September of 2019, and then it also went to that same level in January of 2021. Now, this is the sort of the critical thing right now to think about in the market, and it also will help us identify, when alt season, which is truly what everyone actually wants to know. You can see that Bitcoin dominance has now retraced to the 0.618, right? That doesn't mean it can't go higher, right? It doesn't mean it can't go to, say, the 786. I mean, last cycle we saw Bitcoin USD retrace to the 618. And then, if you look at sort of this fib retracement tool right here, right? I think last cycle it retraced to the 618, but obviously this cycle it went way above that, right? So it doesn't have to do exactly what it did last cycle. I think it makes the most amount of sense to assume that, until there's structurally something happening to make us think that the uptrend is over, it's probably better to assume the uptrend's continuing on. If you were to look at Heikin-Ashi candles for Bitcoin dominance on the monthly, you can see we haven't had a single red one since November of 2022, right? I mean, one strategy is maybe on the first red monthly Heikin-Ashi candle. That's the time to pivot. And of course, if you do that, you're gonna miss the top. But at the same time, who cares if you miss the top? If you rode the Bitcoin dominance rally from 40% to wherever it ends up topping, it doesn't matter if you miss the top by a percent or two. And I'm not saying you have to time it exactly. You can always hedge ahead of time, right? You can always have your moon bags, right? Your degen portfolio if you want, just in case, because there's always a chance that your altcoin does outperform Bitcoin, even in a Bitcoin dominance uptrend. But there's also a reality that this has not yet slowed down. And one of the things, here's the thing. If you had told me that Bitcoin dominance will be at 60%, I would have assumed that alt Bitcoin pairs would have been lower. But if you look, this is one of my favorite charts. It's total 3. So this is everything besides Bitcoin and ETH.
And yep.
Minus USDT. So we're subtracting out a large part of the stablecoin market, divided by Bitcoin, right? If you look at this chart, I feel compelled to think that altcoins are oscillators at best against Bitcoin, right? So over the long haul, they're oscillators at best and bleeders at worst. So the optimistic view that I think the altcoin market would have is something that looks like this, where you basically say, if we get a price label here, the altcoin market tends to top out when it reaches parity with Bitcoin's market cap, right? So when the altcoin market cap is 1, right, when it's basically the same as Bitcoin's market cap collectively, that's normally where the altcoin market tops out against Bitcoin. And it usually bottoms out around a quarter of Bitcoin's market cap, right? You can see all these lows were at 0.25. There was one spike below that occurred in December of the last halving year. It went to 0.25, but then it overshot it all the way down to 0.18. So
wow.
The glass half full approach for altcoins is to basically say that this is you have support at 0.25 and resistance at 0.9, and you say that this is a deviation above the range high, and this is a deviation below the range low, but they shouldn't be taken more seriously than that. They're just deviations that quickly made you think that the market would never go the other direction, and then it did. That's the more optimistic way to look at the market. And so I wonder if it is true that altcoins are oscillators at best, then there still is a chance that Bitcoin dominance goes higher. Now, I got to be honest. I have taken my maxi hat off. I don't think it has to go higher because my 60% target has been reached, and I don't want to stay, toxically bullish on dominance for longer than I need to. because I understand the upside potential that the altcoin market can give people. But I would be remiss if I didn't just point out that in November of 2020, exactly where we are today, right? We're November of 2024. We saw alt Bitcoin pairs rally to this exact same level, right? They've rallied up to 0.39, exactly where they are right now. You can see right now they're at 0.38. This is where they rallied to. They got rejected back there by the 20-week SMA, which is right where they are right now. And then what happened is in December, we saw the final drop by alt Bitcoin pairs. So really the final drop, if my memory serves me correctly, started, I believe, on November 24th of 2020. So it was basically the end of this week. So after this week is over, then if it were to play out like last cycle, it would mean that alt Bitcoin pairs would then bleed for about one more month, and then they would finally bottom out against Bitcoin. So
interesting.
I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think it has to at least be on people's radar. There's no denying that Bitcoin has been relatively stronger, right, than a lot of the altcoin market. You can look at ETH Bitcoin continues to drop. A lot of alts continue to drop. And this is the rally right here. So I remember vividly back in 2020, I made a video back then called Revenge of the Alts. I remember it. It was in November of 2020, and we saw alt Bitcoin pairs rally on up. And I was dumbfounded, because then despite, I thought the lows were likely already in, right, for alt Bitcoin pairs at 0.25, because that was where it historically had bottomed. So I was like, all right, they've probably already bottomed. And then in December of the halving year, Bitcoin ate the altcoins lunch one last time. And so I do think that's an important way to look at the market. So you could, it's possible to get one final drop by alt Bitcoin pairs, but there's something that I do feel like I have to say, because it's not, there's no such thing as a sure thing, right? There's no such thing as a sure thing. There is a chance that you sort of get the devaluation of alt Bitcoin pairs and it doesn't immediately lead to alt season, right? There is a chance that something like that happens. And the only reason I'm going to point that out is if you look at, what was it? If you look at monetary policy, and by the way, cut me off if I'm going too long. I can.
Oh, no, you're good. You're cooking. I'm letting you cook. I love this. This is great.
I can ramble for really, really long periods of time. So
me too.
the other thing just to remember, and this is kind of what makes me at least have a little bit of caution in sort of the declaration for alt season. And we can talk more about sort of what some signs would be that alt season's actually returning, is that there was this period here in 2019 where you can see this blue line is the balance sheet of the Fed. So that was QT. So Bitcoin dominance had its top when QT ended right there. And you can see that alt Bitcoin pairs bottomed out at 0.25, right, at that point. So I wonder, are we here, right? Are we here going into this final drop before it slowly goes back up, right? Or are we here where you drop and then you get an aggressive move up, right? And that, I think that is kind of the bigger question to think about right now, is which one of these data points are we at? Are we here where the Fed's about to pivot from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing? Or are we here where you actually get your full-blown alt season starting at the beginning of 2025? And I think that is probably what people should probably focus on between now and the end of the year.
Right. This is very interesting. The total 3 subtracted by stables divided by Bitcoin. Can you find this chart normally on TradingView?
Yeah, I just type in that exact thing. Total 3
okay.
divided by Bitcoin. Yeah, I've been using it for years. I mean, this is why in 2022 I told people that dominance was going to 60%, because here's the other. I don't show this version of it a lot because I don't want people to not like me. I mean, I just want to be. I think at the end of the day, I think we all want to be liked, right? But they are oscillators at best. The glass half empty approach that a lot of people don't want to hear is that there is a let me fix this really quick. There is a chance that they're actually just bleeding, and then you have this parallel channel that you have sort of a low and then a high and then a lower low and a lower high. that's sort of the other way to look at it. And it's one of those things. It's like in the back of my mind. It's not my base case right now. I'm sort of choosing to be more optimistic, but I think I at least have to show it just in case that, you know, if this ever does play out, if they ever do go back down to the bottom of the channel, it would probably actually be a great opportunity, right? If I mean, because the last few times they did that, it would have felt like alts were dead, but that was exactly where they turned it around. So just something to keep in the back of your mind.
No, that is extremely interesting. And, you know, that is kind of ties into, you know, I did a tweet yesterday basically saying, hey, I have an interview with Ben Cowen tomorrow. If you could ask him anything, what would it be? And of course, a lot of the questions are ask him about this coin, ask him about that coin, ask him about, and of course, right. And my thought, I mean, I kind of already know what you're going to say. Well, like, you might not want to know the answer because mostly all alts have bled against Bitcoin. And that's not like an inaccurate thing to say. You're not saying that because you hate this project or hate, that's just an accurate statement. And the truth is I mean, I'm a big altcoin person. I just did $100,000 portfolio buy on my channel. I didn't buy a lick of Bitcoin because I do feel that we are, for 2025, ultimately, whatever I'm buying these alts at now is going to be a net win by the end of the bull run. At least that's my thesis. And I take it or leave it, you know, but at the end of the day, like kind of to hammer home, I do have a second question for you, but just to hammer home what I said about dominance, especially for people who are newer to crypto, is that, so, you know, Bitcoin dominance is in this ascending, broadening uptrend. All right. And this here would be the loss of structure and the loss of 57.1, which is support resistance from back here multiple times. That would be like the confirmation on losing, like the confirmation support resistance level of the break of the structure. And, you know, kind of 2021, May 2021, this was the bulk of the alt season. So hopefully when this turns over, whenever that does, we will have our day in the sun. And, you know, simply put, that is, we've agreed on that in this conversation, but it's also a big timing thing. And I think that you even said it when you were talking about the chart you showed earlier, that if you went off the first red candle, like you're not going to hit the bottom. But like I always say, like, you're never going to buy sell the top. You're never going to buy the bottom. The money's always invariably made in the middle. And if there's a 60% move, if you got 20% of that move, like, hey, like, great job, win, lock it up. And I think people kind of need to take a little bit more like a pragmatic approach to trading, at least in my point of view. And that is kind of why I wanted to shed some light on, you posted a tweet a week or so ago, and it was basically others versus Bitcoin. And it was, you know, this was the cycle 17 or 18 where others versus Bitcoin looked like this, and then it went up. And then here's the 2021 or the end of 2020, it looks like this, and then it went up. And here we are now. And it had similar characteristics, which kind of comes down to the timing question on, I know you did answer some of the timing question with what the chart you just showed before this, but I also thought that had a really interesting take, and I wanted to shed some light on that.
Yeah. If you could throw my screen up, I could talk a little bit about it. By the way, just to touch one last time on Bitcoin dominance, you might like this chart here. It's basically an approximation of Bitcoin dominance excluding stablecoins. So if you exclude stablecoins, you can see that dominance has basically been in this wedge since 2020, and it tagged it at 52 and 56. And I basically told people my target was 65%, which it tagged here in November. So I think you have the two most likely outcomes for it are where you might sort of see a sort of a rounded top where it maybe comes back up here in December and then slowly breaks structure in 2025. Or you could get a situation where it breaks above the wedge. Everyone becomes a Bitcoin maxi, right? Because alts are just collapsing against Bitcoin. And then when you least expect it, it then breaks down, right? So I don't know which of those two paths is going to take, but I probably is going to be one of them. As far as others Bitcoin goes, it's actually playing out identically to how it played out last cycle so far. This is everything outside of the top 10 against Bitcoin. So I know a lot of people don't like, looking at total 3 because it includes some higher market cap alts that haven't really done that well. But if you look at this and the blue line on here, these are interest rates by the Fed. It's fascinating to see how monetary policy has really affected alt Bitcoin pairs. What happened last cycle is that others Bitcoin dropped about 60% as the Fed reached the terminal rate, right? You see where the Fed reached the terminal rate right there in December 2018. Others Bitcoin fell about 60 to 70% during that interest rate rise. Now look here. In this cycle, they did the exact same thing, right? From the top, others Bitcoin fell about, it's almost the exact same number, right? I mean, 60 to 70%. And look where look where that bottom occurred at, right as the Fed hit the terminal rate on interest rates. And then as the Fed achieved their terminal rate, others Bitcoin then rallied about 60% last cycle. The same thing happened here, right? They rallied about 60 to 70%, and they topped about halfway through the pause at the terminal rate. And you see the same thing here, right? They topped about, maybe not quite halfway through. It was sort of a double top, right? One here in December and another one in March. But basically about halfway through, right? And then others Bitcoin got the final drop, which was another 60% drop. And it occurred during the rate cut part of the cycle, right? So as those rate cuts came in, others Bitcoin had its final capitulation. And so I've been following that, thinking that, all right, well, the final part of this, altcoin reckoning, right, which is the devaluation of altcoins against Bitcoin, not the US dollar, right? Because if Bitcoin USD goes up, it lifts the altcoin market with it on their USD pairs. But the Bitcoin pairs are what you're looking at here. So if you take it from the high, others Bitcoin has already dropped about 44%. So they've already made a significant part of that drop. If they were to drop a little bit, let's say they did get that 60% drop, which is what happened last cycle, that would put you at 0.1. And right now they're at 0.16. What's really interesting, if you look last cycle, you can see that others Bitcoin sort of had this trend line that it tagged about 3 times, right? The first time it tagged the trend line was during the rate hike part of the cycle, right here, right there. The second time it tagged this trend line really was right when the pause occurred. And then the third time was during the rate cuts. You can almost draw the exact same thing out this cycle, right? You have your first tag of this trend line during the rate hikes. You have your second tag of the trend line as the pause happens, which is what happened right there. And then the third tag of the trend line, which could occur down here at 0.1, occurs as the rate cuts come in. So it really is fascinating how it's playing out almost in the exact same way. And I think this is the way I like to view the market, because I want to preserve the Satoshi valuation of my portfolio, right? If I go buy an altcoin and it goes up 100%, while Bitcoin goes up 500%, I don't really celebrate that. I'm like, I could have taken on less risk and made more money with Bitcoin.
Right. No, that is absolutely brilliant. Thanks for sharing some light on that. I wanted to kind of get more in depth. When I saw that tweet and I knew I had the interview scheduled, I was like, I am definitely going to bring that one up, because that's certainly very interesting. So final question before we go out. We said, well, let's go 15, 20 minutes. We just blew by that. And I love that. It was a really interesting conversation. Thank you for your time. Say are there any altcoins that you have your eye on that like once dominance break structure that you wouldn't mind throwing some money at?
I mean, I think the first thing the first thing you look at is ETH Bitcoin, because I think that is sort of the bellwether for the altcoin market. Whenever it bottoms, so too will a lot of altcoins bottom, right? I mean, you're seeing a lot of altcoins bleed against Bitcoin. And I think the main reason is we haven't actually seen the Fed pivot to QE yet. They're still reducing the size of their balance sheet.
Right.
So I think, it's hard to know. I mean, I dunk on a lot of altcoins all the time on their Bitcoin pairs. But remember, I don't even think, first of all, a lot of them will become relics, meaning they will never recover to their prior highs. But the ones that will recover, a lot of them haven't even given the chance to bottom against Bitcoin, because we haven't had that shift in monetary policy just yet. So the first thing I would say is look for ETH to bottom against Bitcoin. And, that one has not yet bottomed. My target for ETH Bitcoin for the last few years has been between 0.03 to 0.04, and right now it's at 0.033. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much lower it's going to go. Whenever it bottoms, the rest of the altcoin market will also likely bottom. I don't have any specific altcoin in mind, but what you look for is normally what you want to see is a double bottom on its Bitcoin pair. It's kind of like if you remember Sol Bitcoin, when Sol Bitcoin sort of bottomed out over here in 2022, 2023, you had a double bottom. That's what you generally want to look for. And look what ETH Bitcoin did last cycle, right? It had a double bottom. So and a lot of altcoins follow that same sort of trajectory. I mean, even there's an altcoin that is not very liked in crypto, XRP, by a lot of people. It's true, right? I mean, but again, this is one of those things where it had sort of that at least short-term double bottom. It doesn't mean it can't go down again, but that is generally what you look for. Aave Bitcoin did something very similar. And this is and I've talked about this before on my channel as well, is that this is what you look for altcoins. A lot of them will continue to bleed against Bitcoin until the Bitcoin dominance uptrend is over. But you can occasionally find alts that are bottoming against Bitcoin before the collective market does. That is what you look for, right? You look for a low and then for it to hold that low a few months later. And if you're looking at an altcoin and it hasn't done that yet, right? If it just keeps on bleeding, then it's still a bleeder until proven otherwise. If you look at I'm sort of tracking BNB Bitcoin a little bit right now, because it basically set a low here in December of 2023, and I'm wondering if it's going to come back down and tag that again. So I think that's what you generally look for. The ones that aren't doing that are not creating that structure at all. And I'm not saying they have to have started that structure just yet. Remember, a lot of the coins last cycle didn't put in their first bottom until QE began. So there's always a chance that any altcoin has a future. But if they keep bleeding after QE begins, then I think you have to basically, wash your hands of them and say they're relics and they don't have a future. So that's my opinion.
Right. Interesting. So, that's certainly some homework for you all watching at home to do. Go check out, if you like 10 of these altcoins, go look at their Bitcoin pairs and try to find that structure, try to find, that breakout, that double bottom, similar to what he pointed out there on Aave, and do your homework with it. And it is important to say, it's like, some people even like get me wrong when I talk about this. It's not like I hate this project or I dislike this community. It's just like, it's bleeding against Bitcoin. It's not like a shot at you personally. It's just the chart, and we're pointing that out on the chart. And people get really offended by that. And I'm just like, guys, it's not that big of a deal. Just look at the chart. Like, I don't know.
Right. It's not it's just this is the way the market works, and I think at all times everyone needs to be willing to sort of pivot their view. It's not what, when someone talks about on YouTube or on X, Twitter, just because they say this is what they think will happen doesn't mean that's what they want to happen. It's just that based on monetary policy, based on the current conditions we're in, this is the most likely outcome. And a lot of the posts you'll see are people that kind of learned the hard way, and they're just trying to help. They at once upon a time they didn't believe it, and then basically Bitcoin showed them who was boss, and then they started, then they sort of saw the market a different way. So I think a lot of it is sort of a misunderstanding. It's not what we want to see necessarily. It's just the way the cryptoverse works until QE returns.
Perfect. Well, Benjamin Cowen, man, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate your time and all the charts. I hope everybody watching this at home got a lot of value out of this. I know I did. There's a couple things I'm going to run and look at right now after having this conversation. But any final thoughts before we close today's show?
I don't really have a ton of thoughts. So fun. I mean, I would just say, over the long haul, if you can value your portfolio in Satoshis, you'll probably be more successful. And and it makes sense, right? Your unit of account should not be the US dollar, because we know the purchasing power of the US dollar is asymptotically going to zero, right? So why value your portfolio in US dollars? Value it in Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, it's how much of that do you have? Even if a portion of that is in alts, just is the altcoin you're choosing to take the risk on, is it in Bitcoin? And look, a lot of people call me a maxi. I'm not. I actually think the altcoin market is a great way to make money. I mean, that's where a lot of that's where, I mean, if we're not kidding, right, that's where a lot of the money is made, is in the altcoin market. But you have to remember that there's only 1 year where altcoins outperform Bitcoin historically, and it's the post-halving year. It's 2017, 2021, and hopefully 2025. But look, there's no guarantees. We'll see where things go, but that's all I have for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Everybody, make sure you smash the like button, comment down below. What are your thoughts? Subscribe to the channel, all the things. All of Ben's social medias is down below in the description. Make sure you check him out, and his YouTube channel. One of my personal TA favorites. I really like the social risk video and the HODL waves. I've been plugged in for a couple of years, man. So I do appreciate all the effort you put in. Certainly so much to learn from. And, you know, I'm all for self-education. You know, if you don't know what this is, figure it out, put your head in the sand and look up in a couple of years. Like, I literally started with nothing, and I mean nothing, not that long ago. And in the course of, you know, from 2020 to now, became a millionaire because of crypto. And I did that from listening to people like Benjamin Cowen, from listening to people like Crypto Face, and taking it upon myself to not just listen to these videos, but absorb this information. And like there's a difference between just listening to something and actually learning it. And I think a lot of the thing with the altcoin market is, and why people get so emotional, is because this is what they are. This is their ticket out. This is their way out of the 9-to-5 monotony. And I totally understand that. And I know what that feels like. So my advice to you guys is to take the smartest people in this space have kind of distance themselves. The cream always rises to the top, and use that to your advantage and really listen and learn. And when you watch videos like this, take notes, do everything you can to proactively learn this stuff. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't earn a PhD in 1 week. It takes years and time. But I just wanted to say that because, you know, as one, you know, educational mathematical brain to the next, man, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for the space. So amazing. That's it, everybody. Get rich or get wrecked. Peace.